Native Americans, sometimes called First Peoples, because let's face it, if you're born here, you're native. Are you telling me that the descendants of the slaves, the black African slaves who've been in this country before it was the United States, who've been here for 400 years, someone descended from them who's born and raised here, whose grandparents were born and raised here, isn't native to this land? I might not be. I'm farther south. Um, but the Dutch, the English, they're natives, right? Because if you want to get sticky about it, what we think of as the Native American, which is actually two distinct genetic groups that came at two different times, we're not the first peoples. This is known now. Um, it, it wasn't the Clovis, it was the Solutreans. Predated them by thousands of years, as well as a faction of Australian Negroid peoples from Australia came and lived right where my people live now. Um, the later Asiatic people wiped them out through a form of genocide. It wasn't a total genocide. Some of their culture and um, dancing remained, but they looked like the others, like the other South American Indian. Turns out the Solutreans and the Clovis were both Caucasoid. I remember my first day in Japanese history class, and the teacher, he was he was Japanese, like from Japan, not of Japanese descent, but straight up Japanese. He said that initially all of Japan was white people, and it was Okinawa, and the Okinawans spread north, and there's only very few white people left in Hokkaido. That's the indigenous people, and we find white mummies in China. And the Germans and Tartars came from Mongolia. Hmm. Remember me saying that the only indigenous people to Europe were the Basques, the Celts, the Latins, and the Greeks? Yeah. The Berbers were had blonde hair and blue eyes as well. But many Native Americans, and there's photographs of this, were Caucasian. And there were many samurai indigenous to Japan before the Okinawans got to the Japanese island. Whole family groups that looked European, but they were native to Japan. Um, the last migration of the Asiatic people were violent, and they're the ones that destroyed the megafauna, like the saber-toothed cat, the woolly mammoth, the mastodon, the dire wolf. Um, they eradicated the Australian Negroid people in the Pampas. Um, so they're the third people, third peoples, if not, because you had the Solutreans. I don't know, they'd be the fourth peoples. You had the Solutreans, you had the Clovis, you had and people still try to say Clovis is Asiatic, but you still have the Solutreans to contend with, and you also have the Aboriginal Australian people that had made it before Clovis. And I'll link to multiple documentaries about this. And I had more pictures that I had printed out because I wanted to show this to people, because obviously I work around a lot of Mexicans, right? And they should know their ancestry. But what gets me is the way that the quote-unquote Native Americans treat this. They don't accept any bones that are found, even if they predate Clovis, like even if they're 9,000 years old. And let's face it, if you know anything about American history, none of the Native Americans where they were when the white man arrived, even though the white man was here alongside them. Time of Columbus, the Cherokee lived on the shores and were only chased up into the mountains around the time of the arrival of Columbus. There were massive migrations of people. The sacred Black Hills. I mean, that wasn't. Land changed hands so much. There was no people living in a certain area continually. The Aztecs came down from the north. And I do think that the Celts and the Phoenicians actually made it to modern-day Brazil. We know that the Vikings made it to Newfoundland, and at least as far south as Virginia, but had permanent settlements in Newfoundland, what they called Vinland, and they fought a people called the Skrillex, which were what we call Native Americans. But the Native Americans are very hostile to this because there's this whole race identity thing that pops up, right? And you might call me a racist, but I'm not a racist. I back my culture. I speak Spanish. I also speak English because I'm also an American and half Irish. I practice the most traditional ancient form of Christianity because that's what my people have been for thousands of years, except for maybe the Native American blood that I have in me. But also the Arab blood that I have in me was Christian before it was Muslim. And I want to go live back where I should be living, down there. And if you want to see how ridiculous the idea of any commonality between the Mexicans and the Native Americans of the United States and Canada, just check out my video titled La Raza, because that shoots it all to shit. But there were Aboriginal Australian people in northern Argentina, and the Solutreans that came from Europe lived side by side with all those prehistoric creatures. Didn't massacre them. The extinction event happened when the Asiatic people, the principal ancestor of today's Native American, they're the ones that wiped it out. The buffalo, the reason why, the thing of buffalo you get from horizon to horizon, it's because they didn't have any resistance to disease, because Europe was so filthy from the time of the fall of Rome. They didn't have running water, and it was so filthy, and plagues ripped through Europe. The Black Death ripped through there a couple times. Cholera, measles, typhoid fever, things that we don't have names for. That's why Europeans, if you're of Northern European descent, you have a 2% chance of being being immune or at least resistant to HIV/AIDS, and as well as immune and resistant to Ebola. So when the clothed men made contact with the Native Americans, they unintentionally spread these germs, and it killed. I mean, smallpox infected blankets. That story is a lie. People didn't know about microbes and stuff like that until, you know, beginning around the 1900s, beginning around the 20th century. That's why Listerine was invented. Um, but there was actually a plague in the Yucatan that wiped out 80% of the indigenous people. Horrifying. So that's what caused the bison, which were almost driven to extinction, to come back in these huge numbers. And Dances with Wolves makes it seems like, oh, this is how it always was. No. But yeah, that's some cold hard truth right there. I'll link to documentaries. But the fact that these tribes, that their only power is the fact that they're Native American, and a lot of them just look like white people because they're so interbred with white people that they effectively are like, they're not like the native whites that were here. They quickly confiscate any of the skulls, even though their ancestors did not live on that land 9,000 years ago, and they go and they bury it in a secret location because they want to cover up the past. All right, peace to you. I know this can be quite shocking. Peace to you, brothers.